Dungeons and Dragons races. We've got a little bit of everything here. You want to be a depressed robot with insomnia? We got you. You want to be an unstoppable rage monster that never goes down no matter how many ancient dragons there are? We got you. You want to be Master Oogway from the best animated movie ever, Cars? We freaking got you. When designing a Dungeons and Dragons character, the race that you choose can add a ton of personality to that character. Not only does each race come with a heaping helping of background lore talking about their cultures and lifestyles that can help inspire your character's background, motivations, and skills, but each race also possesses a set of racial traits that are unique to that group. These include things like built-in murder clause, shape-shifting, and the very much coveted ability of being a slime in space. No, you did not hear me wrong. And that's where we're going to be talking about today. No, not just the space slime. We'll get to that later. This is episode 1 of a 3-part series going over the various races in the Forgotten Realms. Disclaimer, we'll mostly be talking about these races from a statistical angle, talking more about their racial traits and giving you a general overview. If you're looking for a more in-depth discussion on each race, we're making a series on that too. We got you. Without further ado, I'm Cork the Mighty with a nerdy guide to D&D, and this is a quick history lesson. See, over the years, Wizards of the Coast, or WotC for short, have released several different versions of their very popular game, Dungeons and Dragons. Each version, or edition, changed old features of the game and added new ones, functioning much like a video game update or a film franchise reboot. In August of 2014, they published the official Player's Handbook for the 5th edition of D&D, the version we currently use today. Kind of. That's a whole nother thing. Contained within the pages of that player's handbook were the 9 core races that we'll be talking about today. Those 9 core races would form the foundation of all of this madness to come, even the space slime, especially the space slime. Over time, WotC released new expansions, adventures, and modules that introduced new playable races along the way. Suddenly, it wasn't just your standard elves and dwarves that were filling up player rosters, but also your elephant people and your dream walkers. But then in the past couple of years, WotC introduced 2 books that changed a lot. The first was Tasha's Cauldron of Everything in 2020. See, back in the day, most races had what's called a racial ability score increase, which automatically boosted one predetermined stat. For example, if you played as a basic elf, you would get an automatic +2 to your dexterity stat. Basic dwarves would get a +2 to their constitution stat, so on and so forth down the line. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything said, oh no, not in my house, and yeeted that into the sun. Well, not entirely. See, nowadays, you still get that ability score increase, but it can be applied to any stat of your choosing. Instead of a +2 to only Constitution, you could apply that to any stat that you want. Strength, charisma, you name it. They did the same thing with proficiencies. If a character is proficient with a certain tool or a weapon or a type of armor, that just means they have experience with it and get boosts on their rolls when using it. And some races came with built-in proficiencies, but with Tasha's, you can in some cases apply those proficiencies to whatever you want. Don't want to be forced to know the Auron language, which is for nerds? Learn the Orc language and be metal as hell. The main idea behind this change was that it allowed players additional customizability with their characters and meant that people didn't feel as pressured to force their characters into cookie-cutter stereotypes as much. For example, Goliaths used to be primarily fighters because they had an automatic boost to both strength and constitution. Big, meaty individuals. But now, you can just change that stat boost to charisma and intelligence to help them, I don't know, run a baking business? Imagine a Goliath-sized cake. I would die. That being said, this increased flexibility led to races being now known as lineages to distinguish between the two. We'll use the term lineages going forward because that's the most up-to-date language, but yeah, that was a decent size change. And then this thing decided to come out. Mordenkainen, I always mess up that name, Presents Monsters of the Multiverse was released in 2022 and essentially took a bunch of pre-established races or lineages and re-released them with slight tweaks. Some got stronger, some got weaker, and all of them had the new Tasha's rules in place. So going forward, we will be referring to the most updated versions of these lineages. You can use the older or legacy versions of them if you want. They're still available, but yeah, only up-to-date stuff here. Okay, rant over. Let's talk about some dragons in these dungeons.
Hey, dragon, not lizard. I don't do that tongue thing.
The Dragonborn, no not you. A proud and brave lineage covered with the tough and beautiful scales of the dragons that born them. The Dragonborn are actually pretty simple, all things considered. What you see is mostly what you get. They are dragons mixed with humanoids. They're a bit larger and heavier than normal humans, but not as big as some other options we'll be talking about. Their special ability is breathing. It's more terrifying than you think. See, each Dragonborn has something called a breath weapon that allows them to exude destructive energy out of their mouths, much like a normal dragon. The standard option people think of is dragons breathing fire, but if you thought that was your only option, oh ho ho, let me open your eyes to the truth. Dragonborn can shoot out many flavors of damage, including the standard fire, ice, poison, acid, and freaking lightning. Yeah, that's gonna be a whole lot of note from me, my friend. The type of damage you deal is based off of your draconic ancestry, which basically asks, what was the color of the dragon that you came from? If they was blue, you was blue too, and your color determines the damage. Red is predictably fire, black acid, green poison, white cold, blue lightning, and a couple others. Whatever type of damage you deal, you also gain resistance to. So not only can you have a bipedal blue dragon person shooting lightning out of its mouth, but that bipedal blue dragon person is also resistant to lightning as well. Take that, Zeus! Whenever you use your breath weapon, anybody caught inside of it must make a roll to save themselves. If they fail, they take 2d6 of whatever type of damage you're dealing, and half as much on a successful save. And if you're confused on what a d6 is, would you look at that? It's a video all about Dungeons & Dragons dice. Who would have thought? Link in the description. And of course, the damage you deal scales with your character level. I'm so fired. So at level 1, it's 2d6, but at level 16, it's 5d6. Not a ton, but still helpful. You can also use this ability once per short or long rest. However, as with most of the core 9 lineages, there are a bunch of sub-lineages under them with tweaked abilities that I'll quickly go over.
Oh, hi, thanks for checking in. I'm still a piece of garbage.
So you know that whole thing about the Dragonborn being a proud, brave lineage that values things like honor and loyalty? Well, Draconblood Dragonborn are kinda like that. Except not at all. The Draconblood are less warriors and more talkers, known for, quote, social manipulation. These things are social manipulators. Good, yeah, I see no issue with this. They have tails, unlike their other Dragonborn counterparts, making them closer in lineage to their draconic ancestors. They're also not the best people on average. In fact, they kinda enslaved some of their own lineage, but we'll come back to that. Instead of getting the awesome ability to breathe fire or lightning, they can see in the dark, and they can roll their dice twice when trying to intimidate or persuade someone. And they can do that once per day. And that's it. No hate to anyone who uses Draconblood. Use whatever lineage you want if you enjoy it and it fits the story you're trying to build. I just personally prefer spewing acid on people in comparison to using the JoJo's intimidation signs on them once per day.
Don't ever fight somebody who smiles when you punch them. They've been waiting for that for too long.
Ravenites are the second and last Dragonborn sub-lineage we'll talk about. They don't have tails, but they are some beefy boys and gals and non-binary pals. Like you thought regular Dragonborn had meat on their bones, Ravenites are like Arby's. They have the meats. This is largely due to the fact that they were once slaves and slave warriors. And who owned them? Why, none other than the Draconblood. Yeah, bit of an oopsie there. Ravenite Dragonborn typically find themselves on the battlefield constantly surrounded by enemies, which is where their special trait comes in. Vengeful Assault, dope name, otherwise known as the Super Smash Bros. Counter. With most lineages, if an enemy hits you, you just sort of take it and you wait for your turn. Ravenites, though, when they get hit, get a sick twisted smile, turn around, and sucker punch the person in the face who dared strike them, no matter the turn order. Basically, when you get hit by somebody that's within your melee range, you can use your reaction to instantly attack that person. You can use this once per short rest, and it might not be the best ability, but it sure is satisfying. Dwarves, stout, resilient, sometimes stubborn. You're over there trying to make a normal house. They make homes out of mountains just because they like it. Their bodies are often as dense as the rocks that they live around, and their beards can twinkle with the shine of the thousands of gems that they harvest every year. Normal dwarves don't necessarily have a special trait apart from their dwarven resilience, which allows them to drink poison as if it were Kool-Aid. They can also see in the dark. The main draw of dwarves when they were first released was the fact that they were good at so many things. You got proficiencies with various weapons and tools. You had an advanced knowledge of stonework, because who doesn't need that when they're trying to fight a mind flayer? And you got a couple of languages. However, because of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, you can typically reallocate those things however you want. So dwarves are still good at a lot of things, but it's up to you to decide what specifically. However, there are a couple of sublineages, 2 of which are easy, and 1 of which has a little bit more to it.
If there's ever going to be any progress,
There's some lovely filth down here.
Your ancestors lived in hills and you get a little bit extra health every time you level up.
I'm not 5'2", I'm 5'3". I said that on the Cassie song.
Your ancestors lived in mountains, you get a couple extra proficiencies, and you're a little bit taller than the other dwarves. Congratulations, you have the privilege of reaching the bottom shelf.
I'm not a witch, I'm not a witch.
But you are dressed as one.
Mark of Warding dwarves are a bit weird. Each possesses something called a Mark of Warding, hence the name, which allows them to cast various spells. You can use each spell once per day and you unlock more as you level up. You also get a bonus when using your investigation skill or your thieves tools. I say they're a bit weird only because they stand out a little bit from the other dwarf sublineages that don't really have much to do with spells. But if you want a thick lad that can create things like magical locks, alarms, and something called an anti-life shell, this is the sublineage for you.
My guide, I am a star. Look at my car. I drive the car and run you over and kill you with it.
The Elves, a graceful and beautiful lineage that treasures things like art, magic, and nature, sometimes hidden away from the world in places cloaked in ethereal mystery. And by God, do they have a lot of sublineages. Once again, the basic vanilla version of the elves is pretty simple to explain. You get to see in the dark, which, if you haven't figured out by now, is a pretty common ability, except with humans, get wrecked humans. You also don't have to sleep. Well, kind of. See, instead of sleeping, elves will enter into a meditative state called a trance, and they only have to do that for 4 hours for it to count as a long rest instead of the normal 8 hours. This means that elves can be great for things like watching over the party's camp while the rest of them sleep. Additionally, elves are descendant from the Fae. And if you don't know who the Fae are in D&D, too bad. No, I'm just kidding. The Fae are kind of supernatural magical creatures that came from another plane of existence. With the name, you might assume that Fae are like fairies because the name's kind of lined up. Fairies. And while some fairies are Fae, not all Fae are fairies. Some are helpful, some are very much not, and it's advised not to mess with them too much because it's really hard to know what type of power level you're dealing with. Lots of magical shenaniganry that really embodies the phrase, "F around and find out." But yes, elves have Fae ancestry, and that magical lineage means that they have advantage against people trying to charm them, and they can't be forcibly put to sleep. Kind of weird seeing the differences in what some parents give their kids. Some will give you the ability to breathe fire and lightning, others will give you protection from the dangers of melatonin. Now, like I said, there are a lot of sublineages, so let's go through them.
Am I better than everyone?
So already, we have some issues, which tends to happen whenever you get something with the Fae involved. There are technically 3 types of high elves, each of which has a different background. See, a long time ago, the elves originally lived on a continent known as Zendrix. However, they had some neighbors, the giants, and they were not very friendly. So eventually, the elves did a rebellion and failed hardcore. They ended up actually needing to leave the continent and eventually settled on an island known as, I believe it's pronounced Aereni, and it's at this point that they got divided into 3 groups. They split into the wise Aereni, the war-loving Valenar, and the normal high elves. The first 2 groups stayed on Aereni, while the normal high elves that we know went to go and live with all the rest of the lineages. However, despite their very different cultures and circumstances, all of their high elves basically function the same way. You get some stat boosts, some proficiencies, an extra language, and an extra cantrip spell. Pretty simple. Now, the specific bonuses you got used to mean the difference, but I believe with Tasha's, those are out the window, assuming you're using those rules.
You are not alone if there are trees.
Wood Elves. While some of their elf counterparts prefer to live in their immaculate halls, the Wood Elves find themselves most at home in the brush, tracking game, and running through the treetops. As with the High Elves, no matter where you're from, if you're a Wood Elf, you get the same tippy-toesies. Your Fleet of Foot ability makes it so that you're slightly faster than everybody around you, and your Mask of the Wild ability makes it much more easier to hide in your natural environment, be it bushes, snow, whatever. Again, nothing super duper strong, but just kinda cool.
Roses are black, violets are black. Fuck you.
It's those damn marks again. Much like the Mark of Warding Dwarf that we talked about, your powers as a Mark of the Shadow Elf come from your Mark of the Shadow. But what can you do with your mark? Well, a fair number of things, actually. With Cunning Intuition, you get a bonus to your performance and stealth skills. Shape Shadows gives you the Minor Illusion spell at level 1 and the Invisibility spell at level 3. And Spells of the Mark gives you a bunch of other spells as you level up that focus on deceiving and distracting those around you. If you haven't put it together yet, this lineage is very good for the tricksters, the schemers, those who want their strength to be in their stealth and ability to fool those around them into maybe not even knowing that they were there. But with shadows, there must also come light, and the Pallid Elves are a great example of this because they are pale as hell. Oh my god, these guys' weakness is not a dragon or a giant, it is being out in the sun for more than 2 minutes without SPF 3000 sunscreen. But besides their pale exterior, the Pallid Elves are essentially the inverse of the Mark of Shadow Elves. While the latter stick to the shadows, sometimes engaging in the cruelties of the world, the Pallid Elves walk through the world with a childlike curiosity as they practiced their mystical magics. Your incisive sense gives you advantage on your investigation and insight skills, while your Blessing of the Moon Weaver, god I love these names, gives you a couple of extra spells including light, sleep, and invisibility. Kinda sus that they share a spell with the Mark of the Shadow Elves, but whatever. That's the elves.
Dance with me, dance with me, dance with me, dance the night away.
From the ancient majestic cities of the elves, we now turn to the bustling boroughs abound with bountiful laughter and chaos. It's time for the gnomes. Gnomes typically are a delight, and again, you don't have to play them that way, but a lot of gnomes are just here for a good time. They seek to squeeze as much enjoyment out of life as possible, viewing life itself as a wonderful thing. The abilities of normal gnomes are similar to normal dwarves. You've got dark vision, extra languages, and advantages on intelligence, wisdom, or charisma saving throws against magic. They are one of the shorter lineages as well, along with the dwarves, meaning their walking speed is a little bit lower and making wood elves Usain Bolt in their eyes. But while their base abilities are a little bit basic, their sub-lineages make up for this.
I can't tell if that's supposed to be a piece of encouragement or an ominous warning. That is entirely up to the trees.
Forest gnomes are essentially the gnome equivalent of wood elves. You was raised in the woods, you're gonna get some cool stuff, starting with Natural Illusionist, which gives you the Minor Illusion spell. But beyond that, a forest gnome's main trait is their ability to speak with small animals, which works exactly how it sounds. Wanna talk to that squirrel over there? Go for it, buddy. Wanna have a best friend bunny that you can chat with? Go for it. There is a stipulation that you can only communicate simple ideas with this trait, so no reading of Nietzsche's great works. We're not going to turn a bunch of badgers into communists by reading them Karl Marx, but it's still cute and sometimes very useful.
What is my purpose?
You pass butter.
Oh my god.
You want to get into some mechanical mischief? The rock gnome is here for you. Despite the name giving off more of an archaic vibe, rock gnomes are actually one of the most technologically fluent sublineages, or just lineages period. Their first trait is literally called Artificer's Lore, which gives you a huge boost when trying to remember the history of things like magic items, alchemical objects, or technological devices. My rock gnome got big brain energy. Then they also have their trait Tinker, whereby you can invest an hour and 10 gold pieces into building things like a clockwork toy, a musical box, or something literally called a fire starter. It's essentially a lighter, but I love calling it a fire starter. Gnomes are just fun. Like, out of the core lineages, gnomes are one of the most cute, wholesome, and fun ones out there.
How the f do you write so many books so fast?
Essentially the same structure as the previous marks that we talked about, but your boosts go to your history and calligraphy skills. Sure. The spells that you get automatically are Message, Comprehend Languages, and Magic Mouth. Again, sure. Along with the other spells that get added to your pool at certain levels. This lineage is great for things like communication and languages and Yeah, that's it.
I'm starting to think that really f***ed me up. I hadn't thought about it in a while.
Half-Elves are kind of a tragic lineage when you think about it. They're a human-elf hybrid, and their lore descriptions really hammer home the potential disadvantages of that from a cultural perspective. The player's handbook actually reads, quote, "To humans, half-elves look like elves, and to elves, they look human. They walk in two worlds, but truly exist in neither. In some cases, half-elves literally do not have any place to belong except with other half-elves. Not elves, not humans. Which is kinda sad. In terms of abilities, they got dark vision. They also have that Fey ancestry, which means they can't be charmed as easily, and they can't be put to sleep. They have proficiencies in a couple extra skills, and know a couple extra languages. Pretty simple. You know what's also simple? Only having 2 sub-lineages.
I'm rocking with Mark, because Mark is rocking with us.
And they're both marks, so I'm doing them together. By now, you all know how marks work. Boost a skill, give some spells. Easy peasy, beholder squeezy. I don't think that one works the way I think it does. So what does each mark make better? You want to be like Sherlock Holmes, don your cap, and be the world's greatest detective? Mark of detection. You can detect all kinds of stuff. Poison, magic, traps, invisible people, depression, anxiety. Oh wait, that's just my therapy list. You want to be an airbender from Avatar? Mark of the Storm. Create gusts, fog clouds, levitate, and summon elementals to fight for you. Pretty useful if I do say so myself.
Puff out your chest, take a deep breath, you're gonna be okay.
Hey, you want to play as a gnome, but also rewrite reality? The Halfling. On the surface, halflings and gnomes share a couple of characteristics. Beyond their height, they're also mostly kind-hearted lineages, with halflings being more on the calmer side of things. A lot like to live quiet lives outside of war and political strife, opting instead to do things like make a farm, have a family, be happy. But they can, and I repeat, they can and are very willing to steal your kneecaps if you hurt them or their community. Halflings, though, have one ability, one very infamous ability. Not their brave trait that makes it harder for them to be frightened. Not their halfling nimbleness that allows them to go through the spaces of larger creatures as if they were going under their legs. No, I'm talking about their lucky trait. It's actually a very simple ability. You just can't roll ones. It's just not a thing. And yes, it's as broken as it sounds. Okay, there are some stipulations. The full trait reads, when you roll a 1 on the d20 for an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, you can re-roll the die and must use the new roll. So if you're using anything other than a d20, this ability doesn't apply. And you must use whatever you roll next, but come on, that's still so good. I've actually played in campaigns where halflings were either banned or you had to play a reworked version of them because of this trait specifically. Rolling a 1 is typically considered an instant failure in whatever you're doing, so the ability to just say, nope, that didn't happen is insane. In summation, fun trait, fun lineage. Just make sure you talk about it with your dungeon master ahead of time. Right, on to the sub-lineages.
Don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious, don't be suspicious.
You are naturally stealthy. No, like that's your actual ability. You're just better at hiding. Next!
He said poison, I said goodbye.
Poison doesn't do much to you. That's about it. Stout resilience is actually really similar to the dwarves' poison resistance, which has created this funny situation where a lot of people think that stout halflings are related to dwarves, but yeah, you can drink poison like Kool-Aid. Next!
I don't want to do shit. I want to be a tree.
God, I love forest lineages. Lotusden Halflings have essentially learned to live in the wilds, connected to something called the Lotusden Greenwood, which is what gives them their magical abilities. With Child of the Wood, you gain a couple extra spells like Druidcraft, Entangle, and Spike Growth, stabby stabby. And with Timberwalk, number 1, people can't track you as easily, and number 2, you can move through difficult terrain like it's no problemo. You are a part of nature, and it has your back.
I'm rocking with Mark.
2 more marks. Whatever could they do? Want to be the pseudo support of your team? Mark of Healing. You get a ton more healing spells. And that's about it. Mark of Hospitality essentially allows you to become the world's greatest host. You can make food and drink appear out of nowhere. You can conjure up huts to give people a place to relax. And you can summon unseen servants to tend to your guests. Classy.
I am feeling the effects of masculinity right now. I feel the testosterone. I want to go to war!
Hey you! Yeah, you! Do you like to fight? Do you like to just take as many hits as possible and never go down? Is your safe space in the midst of brutal combat? You look like you could fight right now. Come on, let's do it! I fully realize I do not have the presence to pull that off. My limbs have the thickness of wax paper that you put on a baking sheet. Half-Orcs. Half-Orc, half-human, 100% certified beef. Their emotions run hot, they view scars as points of pride, many seeking greatness and to prove their might on the world stage. Half-Orcs, they're, kind of hard to take down sometimes. First of all, they're menacing. Yeah, I sure hope they are. This trait essentially gives them advantage whenever they're trying to intimidate someone, which I can see it, but the two traits that I just adore are relentless endurance and savage attacks. Dear Bahamut. So let's say you're fighting a half-orc and you manage to get its health all the way down to 0. It's over, right? Their relentless endurance says, no, you missed one, and returns them to life with 1 hit point because that's all they need to whoop your ass. Now, of course, they can only do this once per long rest, but that extra life might give them just enough time to use their second trait that I mentioned, Savage Attacks, which states that every time you score a critical hit, you get to add an extra dice onto your damage roll. For those unaware, when you roll to hit something, if you roll a perfect 20, it is considered a critical hit, and your damage is effectively doubled. If your weapon normally did 1d6 of damage, rolling a perfect 20 makes that a 2d6 of damage, or doubles whatever the end result was. That's kind of a house rules thing on how it works. But with half-orcs, that 2d6 becomes a 3d6, which at early levels can really pack a punch. It gets even worse when you consider that things like two-handed great axes deal 1d12 damage, meaning if you roll a crit, that's 3 12-sided dice coming right at your face like a truck. In summation, they're hard to put down and can potentially put you down in an instant. Half-Orcs. They do have one sublineage, and it's none other than
Mark.
Another Mark. What's it good for? Well, it's good for finding stuff. It's the Mark of Finding. Ain't much, but it's honest work. You want to be able to track and locate almost anything you want? Mark of Finding. If a Bloodhound were to be turned into a lineage, this would be it. This is a very good option for if you need to find something or someone across long distances or in nature.
I'll have a mocha caramel latte chino made with skim milk, no whipped cream. Please put that in.
Humans. Next. Nah, I'm just kidding. We'll talk about humans. I mean, should we? Because it's essentially you. It's literally a self-insert species. Humans are by far one of the most simple lineages in D&D, which is why so many people play them, especially early on. They don't really have any fancy gimmicks like breath attacks or being lucky or relentless endurance. The primary draw of humans is the fact that they get a +1 bonus to each of their stats. So while most lineages would get a +2 to one stat and maybe a +1 to another stat, because humans don't have any special traits, they just get a +1 to each stat. And that's it. Now humans, thankfully, have a handful of sub-lineages that are the most original thing that you can possibly think of. 5 marks? 5 mark sub-lineages! Oh my god, you can actually make a boy band out of those things. Humans, please. Please, you can't do this to me. Okay, we're going to lightning round these things. Feel free to pause at any moment. First, Mark of Finding, which makes you better... Wait a minute, is that the same thing? We did this one already. Yeah, literally, the lineage we just finished, the Half-Orcs, their one sub-lineage was Mark of Finding, and the humans freaking stole it. I am astounded at the level of originality. It is word for word the same sub-lineage just for humans. Okay. Moving on from that, Mark of Finding, you're good at locating and tracking stuff. Mark of Handling, a lot of spells to summon, control, and become friends with animals. Mark of Making, conjure up various different types of weapons, attacks, and items, including flaming swords, magical barrages, and floating discs. You are a walking dimensional backpack. Mark of Passage, all sorts of movement-based spells. You want to jump high, run fast, and teleport? Here's your mark. Mark of Sentinel. You are a shield. You create wards, deflect spells, and essentially protect you and your team from harm. This is actually one of the only mark sublineages that has an extra trait, whereby you can swap places with one of your teammates as long as they're within 5 feet of you, so you can take a hit instead of them. Good lad.
I look like a moose.
Yes, but a very cute moose. Make all the boy moose go, wah!
And finally, we are here, the last of the core lineages, and boy is this one special. Tieflings are derived from human bloodlines, but touched by the infernal, giving them devilish horns, long thick tails, sharp canine teeth, and a wide variety of skin hues. It is largely because of this appearance that tieflings have constantly found themselves faced with needless persecution from other lineages, forced to stay in the roughest sections of cities by the nobility, needing to make their own way in the world due to their lack of a homeland. Yeah, tieflings have it rough. Like them, Dragonborns, and maybe Half-Orcs are the ones who get the most flack from other lineages like humans and elves. But it's mostly tieflings that get this, that I've found. And maybe it's just the stereotype, but to be fair, who's gonna talk smack against this? Or this? A soon-to-be-dead person, that's who. Tiefling traits are also pretty simple and are probably what you might expect from someone with infernal magic coursing through their veins. They're naturally resistant to fire damage, their infernal legacy gives them a couple extra spells at different levels, and they can understand the infernal language. They also got that sweet, sweet dark vision. And in terms of sublineages, they don't have any. Okay, they used to. They used to have a bunch of them, but these are old, they're considered legacy, and I'm covering the new stuff. I'm not talking about 8 different lineages, except Mephistopheles. I just like the fact that I know how to pronounce that name. I used to not be able to do that. That's called character progression, and you're gonna need that for D&D. And with that, the book draws to a close on our first D&D Lineages video. Closing notes, I think lineages like the Dragonborn, Halflings, Half-Orcs, or Gnomes are probably the most fun to play out of the original core 9, but lineages like humans, dwarves, or even tieflings are probably easier for newer players. But feel free to try what you want. If you have an experienced player or your DM is experienced, they'll probably be able to walk you through the complexities. Next episode, we'll be covering the exotic lineages. I'm talking shapeshifters, record players that look like birds, Atla lawsuits. It's gonna be cool. And I hope to see all of you there. If you enjoyed, as always, like, subscribe, and share to anyone who might find this useful. And if you have any questions, put them in the comments. This is Korg the Mighty, signing off for a nerdy guide to D&D.